This podcast is hosted by Cortex.io. We help engineering leaders build orgs that ship reliable software faster with AI. Check out the link in the description and see how we've helped our customers cut their MTTR in half, double their deploy frequency, and save thousands of engineering hours with golden paths and the right guardrails. Thanks for listening to Brain Trust, a podcast for engineering leaders by engineering leaders. Hey, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm Ganesh. I'm one of the co-founders and CTO of Cortex. If you want to quickly introduce yourself.
I'm Mare. I'm a principal engineer at Xero, and I'm from Melbourne, Australia.
Well, I'm excited to dive into all things production readiness. What that even means. How do you think about it? How do you roll it out? How do you get people to care? So maybe we'll start at the very top. What is production readiness, and why do we care about it? And why do you care about it?
I mean, production readiness really starts with a key thing. And that's a key thing we do. Everything we do as an organization, as engineers, is the customer focus. So if we think about what we want to ship out to the customer, new features, new experiences, production readiness is the core part of that. It's really to be in a position to answer the question, am I ready to ship out this feature to my customer? Am I ready? Is it going to be secure? Is it going to be available? Is it going to give a good experience to the customer?
The other framing I've heard is more of like an internal focused approach where it's like, are we ready to support the service? So I guess why do you think about it from a customer lens versus a like internal readiness lens?
I think that the two are intertwined.
Yeah.
Right. If you think it purely from an internal perspective, you're missing the focus of the customer. Mm-hmm. Right. It's important as a team or a division, the service you own, that you have a clear indication of what you'll be able to ship out, how confident you are in owning and in supporting it. But if you stop at that point and you don't think about when it gets to the customer, I think you're missing an extremely important part of that.
Yeah, I like that framing. It's almost like the customer lens. It's like a superset of what you might think about otherwise. Because I guess in practicality, what does that look like? Like what is net new in a production readiness program that is included when there's a customer focus versus not? Like, is it like SLOs? Is it like uptime? Like, is it more of like the deliverable on the other side? Like, what does that lens look like?
It's these key things that would contribute to that, right? But I think there's not a clear separation between the two, but SLOs, absolutely. Yeah. The ability to be aware of latency, the ability to understand when, if you're shipping it out, that probably a good example would be you're shipping out a new feature. It's available in production, it's live. To be aware that it's functioning correctly before your customer would know about that. So about synthetic testing, having those signals to give you an indication that, hold on, I just shipped this out and things are going wrong. But I want to pick that up as quickly as possible so that I can solve the problem and either rolling back or, pushing out a new fix and, to improve that experience before the customer knows about that.
What does a production readiness program look like? Like, what does it entail? Like, where does it start? Where does it end? What does it actually mean in practicality?
So if you think about production readiness, at the core, it is understanding what is the expectation, right? And that can be standards, right? For instance, engineering or reliability standards. So giving your engineering teams a clear understanding of what is the expectation. So when you want to ship something, these are the things you need to adhere to, right? And in principles, principles forms part of that. And then once you have that, you want to create that visibility. A good analogy is if you're driving in a car, you have a dashboard. Right? You know that if you're going to be driving to Australia from New York, which is impossible, you want to make sure that you have either enough fuel or your EV is charged fully. Right? And those indicators gives you an indication of where you are now. Right? If you don't have those indicators and you just get in your car and you're going to drive all the way to Melbourne, hopefully you're not going to do that. Please don't do that, Ganesh. And you're on the way and you don't have any indicators, you never know things are going wrong. Yeah. Right? And that's where having the confidence to know that everything's fine when I'm starting off, when I'm going to ship something out. So that's really when you filled up your vehicle and all the indicators saying there's no gauges, no signals are telling you things are going wrong. And then once you have that confidence, to be in a position to know that, all right, I'm comfortable shipping that out. So for us, from a production readiness, where we look at like confidence score as an example.
Mm-hmm. What is a confidence score?
Very good question. Confidence score for us is to give an indicator to our teams. So if you think about you making a change, small change, right, and you taking it from your local environment and you then push it into your source control, which normally is just GitHub. Once you've done it and you have a PR open, the confidence score is the ability to go through multiple signals to get an indication of what is the implications of that change. To if you ship this change out to a customer, what will be the implications? So those signals can be from a testing perspective, quality, so using something like SonarQube, test coverage. It can be around the number of lines of code that you were pushing in as part of that change. So, if you think about large PRs means high risk to an extent, so you want a small change. And that can contribute to that confidence score and being, giving a signal to say, look, if I take this new change and I deploy it based on that calculation, the probability of it having an impact on a customer would be quite small.
So is it safe to say like the confidence score is like a delta in the production readiness for a service or something like that?
Yeah, it's the starting point, right?
Yeah.
Once you get to a single change, and you then start looking at the point where you're now going to use your CI/CD pipeline, and you're going to start deploying that out into an environment. You want to form multiple changes, multiple change scores would then be aggregated for that deployment. And then you start bringing those together to be in a position to know that if I take change A and B, I put it together based on the score, I'm still in a good position for that to go out to production.
I want to get back to how this fits into production readiness, but maybe before we talk about that, if I don't have a production readiness program today or a shared definition of what good looks like or what the expectations are, like you said earlier, where do I start? Like, are there common things that every company or engineering team should be looking at when it comes to production readiness? If not, how do you design the right set of expectations? Where do you start?
Okay, I think from an engineering perspective, there's key things that I think we all should be aware of. And we, at Xero, we use a PRC, a production readiness checklist. And we also have this operational readiness, right? So it's for every change that goes out, we have a clear indication of what best practices, those standards we're referring to, is being implemented for the service that we're going to be deploying. Key things as part of that is, one, we talked about quality. So testing for me personally is probably the most important part of it. To understand if this change goes out and things go wrong, what's the implication for the customer? And then when you say, okay, if it does implicate the customer, how quickly can I roll back? What is that rollback strategy? And then from a supporting perspective, having run books available, the type of deployment, for instance, canary releases, is that possible? Feature management is another example, which I'm a big fan of. Is an expectation is if you're going to deploy a new change into production, that the feature is behind a feature flag, and then progressive rollout is another opportunity to ensure that you just reduce the blast radius as part of what is going out to production.
So it sounds like, maybe distilling it, it's like there's a category of prevention. It's like, what are the practices we can follow to prevent something from going wrong? The second category in a production readiness checklist or operational readiness checklist is detection. So if something goes wrong, we want to know about it. From there, it's like mitigation. So if something goes wrong, we know about it. Are we able to mitigate it easily? And like, is that kind of a way to... I
would say it's, if we go back to the analogy of driving a car all the way to Melbourne, At the beginning, you got your confidence, right? So you know everything's fine. As you're driving, you get in a sense of things are going wrong. You can make a decision, right? You can say, okay, car's overheating, I can stop. And then your ability to reach out, right? So you're phoning, AAA to come around and help you to establish what is wrong. A key thing that I wanted to add to that is, when for us to be, not all changes are the same, right? And that's an important thing to probably call out. So what we do is we look at, our product, and we really get a sense of, and this is where the customer focus comes in again. We really want to understand the jobs to be done.
By each service, or
every service, and not just so from a service perspective, but also the product itself. Clear understanding of what those are, and then based on that, we can create a criticality tiering. Right, we can understand how important that job is, or the jobs for that service, and then based on that, we give it a rating. And that contributes to the standards that I was talking earlier, reliability standards, where, if it's a low risk area, the expectation for that would be lower in comparison to something that is touching a large percentage of customers. So we really want to ensure that teams that owns high critical services, that they clearly understand that we, from a testing perspective, test coverage, debatable thing, is to ensure that, you're not going to send something out with 30% test coverage. It also helps, as part of our software design reviews, and something we can touch on, to enable the team that, I'm a principal engineer. All principal engineers has got a responsibility to review and really going to get an understanding of the changes we make, the design of the implementations of changes to a service. Is really to understand, if we make change A, what is the impact? And criticality tiering forms a very important part of that.
One of the things that this brings up for me, and I think this is more important than ever, has your idea of production readiness changed at all with the advent of AI coding assistants? Do you think about production readiness differently? Is it more important? Is it different? How has it changed, if at all?
Look, in AI plays an important part. And it's not just changing, for me, not just production readiness, but it's changing the way we look at engineering as a whole. I think one of the key things that it does contribute, when we're talking about production readiness, is, where's the code really coming from, right? So we're using AI assistants, we're using review from a code review perspective. We're using that AI support to get a clear indication of, engineer A is making a change. It's really helping us to create that additional visibility. But we also want to ensure that whatever we're shipping out to our customers are robust and strong, and it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. So it's bringing an additional level of awareness of, But it doesn't change it to the extent where there's this clear separation. Because if you think about code that you're shipping, if it's coming from an AI assistant that is giving you a recommendation on a function, is generating your unit test for you, and you're very happy about that, it's still the human factor that comes into where before that goes out to any customer that is being reviewed. We still want to make sure that the human element is there to make sure that everything we do is being verified. And then when it goes out to production, it's not going to cause a lot of challenges or problems along the way.
Does that mean that production readiness is more important now than it was in the past? You talk about the human element, and I think about maybe, developers who owned a service. You could say, okay, they understand their service, and so maybe you get around some of the requirements for production readiness. Not that you should, but you could argue that maybe people knowing their services intimately could help prevent certain classes of issues. With AI writing more of that code, does the adherence to production readiness process, is that more important now, or?
I don't think so.
Okay.
It'd be funny to say no.
Yeah. Because,
it's this massive shift. I think production readiness, where it's becoming extremely important, is the dependency on the systems that we are building. Right. customer, and for me, it's always about the customer.
Yeah.
It's the user at the end of the day. You think about Xero, we're providing for small businesses service like accounting, core and payroll and workforce management and expenses. Yeah. If you're a small business and you're already very, you time poor, you want to feel confident that when you're using a system, that it is doing exactly what it's expected to do. Yeah. So production readiness contributes to that. The expectation from customers these days are extremely high. Yeah. They want features available. They want features to be well polished. So production readiness is contributing to ensure that if I'm shipping out a new feature or I'm giving a new experience to a customer, that it's going to work. And it's going to be a seamless experience from day one. If it doesn't work, then we're in a position that we can roll back quickly. And the customer doesn't feel frustrated. AI and AI assistants or, atomic agentic AI, all of these things that comes into play, it's just really helping us to contribute to that experience. Mm-hmm. But I don't think it's elevating production readiness to the point where suddenly it's becoming a critical thing. It's probably just another signal that comes into play. Yeah. And it's probably something we need to be aware of. Being that it could have an impact. But I think from an engineering practice, things are very similar for me.
Yeah. When we talk about production readiness, is that a one-time thing? Like, is it a single? You mentioned like as a principal engineer, we need to review things. Like, is it you've been reviewed and you get the badge and now you're ready and you can go, or is it like an ongoing process, or like how often do you look at it? How often do you think about the readiness of a service, of a change, or whatever that might be? So
we separate the two, right? So we have the software design review, and that happens early. So we're shifting left, similar to when we talk about quality and testing. Yeah. We really want to get it closer to the engineer, to the point where they're making the change. So we can, if things are not really 100% correct, we can adjust quite quickly. So that's that first phase of it. The operational readiness side, that confidence score from a individual change to when we deploy, or from a service, we have that aggregated view with additional signals, more for getting a sense of history, the custom metrics, if you think about using Cortex as part of that, to bring that kind of data, to really see how things are changing. It is a continuous thing. Being that if you think about we making changes on a regular basis, the expectation is that we're making a lot of changes on our services, and services are changing the whole time. It's a living thing, So I don't see it as you making a change today and then 6 months down the line you go like, well, I'll look at my confidence score now, or I think I'm production ready. It's really, so if you're making a change, it will do that kind of calculation. If you're deploying, every time you deploy, it's really going to do it, give you that sense of confidence that whatever you're going to send out to the customer is working correctly. How do you prevent overloading developers with like yet one more gate or requirement now that they think about like, I have to think about my production readiness and my confidence score and all these things? Like, how do you make sure that it doesn't become a burden for engineers? I think that's where automating it as much as possible comes into play. So we've learned from, when you're doing reviews as an example, that's why we want to bring it closer to the developer. So you want to get the engineer or the team to be in a position to say, look, this is the change we're making to a service. And they in a position to, between the group that looks at it and the team that owns it, at that point, we really want to be in a position to give feedback early. Yeah. So we don't go and invest 60% or 80% of time, capacity. And then when we get to that point, they go like, we need to change it again. But then when you think about that confidence score, the reason we're investing in that is to take the heavy lifting away from the team. So the team, the only thing they have to worry about is when they pushing a change, they have that indicator, they have the visibility of the implication of that change. Yeah. They don't have to go to multiple places to get a sense of, all right, I've got to go to SonarCube and maybe have a look at some metric, and then I've got to go to another system, or I've got to gather my whole team together, and we're going to have a meeting or two meetings on a weekly basis to come together and agree, okay, we're ready for production now. Yeah. So we really want to take that away from it. All the things we do, and that's AI the AI contribution from tools that we bring into the space is really to enable the engineer to focus again on the most important part,
the customer.
is the customer.
Yeah. How and who should be looking at production readiness? Like, is it a team's responsibility to continuously, review their own services? Is it more of like a operational excellence thing where like leadership is the one consuming the information? Is it both? Like, who are the right people to be looking at this? Is it tech leads? Like, what does that demographic look like, I guess?
I think it's not a one group as per se, but it's at different levels and different times, right? So it's the engineers closer to the ground, closer to the change we're making. So for them, it would be to ensure that they have that confidence in deploying. Then, once you start aggregating and they're bringing all that data together and you get some form of history, that's really when it comes to management. Your engineering manager or even higher, to be really getting an indication of the score in that area. So if you start looking at a metric and you start seeing that, for instance, things are going really well and suddenly it's dropping, it can give an indication that we've let, we lost the focus. It can also give an indication that, maybe there's been a vulnerability that comes into play. Or we have a dependency on another team in that space, to give us some indication of how what we're in a position to deploy. So I would say it's just different focuses and different use of that kind of information, that kind of metrics,
and different granularity of that information.
Absolutely,
yeah. You mentioned production readiness and operational readiness as two different things. What is the difference?
I mean,
is there a difference?
There's probably not a difference in a true honesty. Operational is just to be in a position to, when you deploy it and you're going to start using like it's ready. Yeah. Production is the same thing. Production readiness is really just to give a sense of when it's in front of the customer. Yeah. So I would say it's probably the same kind of thing.
Yeah, it's different marketing.
Different marketing. Yeah.
But I do think there's some value in marketing for a reason, right? It's like it frames the way you think about what goes into it, what comes out of it. And so I think, calling it production readiness and framing it, and maybe we should call it customer readiness. I don't know.
For me, the reason we're doing all of this, right, is for the customer. So I if you say to me, should we do it customer readiness? I would say absolutely. Yeah. Production readiness does give an emphasis, right? So when you say, even in, when you're talking to engineers and you use the language of, is that in production? Yeah. And I think that's probably an important factor to consider in that.
Yeah. The other thing I want to talk about is where in the process, if at all, do you gate on this? Like, do you prevent deployments from happening if somebody's not meeting their production readiness standards? Do you block a change from going out if that change has a low confidence score? Like, are gates part of this, or is it more of like a kind of side review process, if you will?
I mean, there is a check-in point, right? And that's a lot about that is that to ensure, we were talking about those checklists, to be in a position to know that the team has thought about all of the aspects, the ability to roll back, to have a really strong awareness of the implication of a change on the customer. If that is not done, right, there is a check as part of the deployment process to get it out to production where it would not allow a change to go through. Confidence score, and that is still something that it's not a hard stop, but it all depends the way we're going to look at it down the path, down the track.
So I guess right now, the way you think about it, why is there a deployment gate on the production readiness piece, but not on the confidence score? Like, what's different about those, or why are those two things treated differently?
I mean, confidence score, and that's quite a new aspect that's coming into play. And I think it probably stopped with, if you think about to be operational ready, right? And we have that verification happening at that point, the two will probably come together. And the one would contribute to the other. because we also want to ensure that especially from the heavy lifting that I was referring to, that we still continuously reduce the investment in that space, or the investment from an engineering team in that space.
That makes sense. Do you think about security as being part of production readiness or confidence? Because you hear sometimes two schools of thought where it's like security is a totally different thing. We have security standards, and then we have like traditional, operational type things. Do you see those as being part of the same program, or do you think about them separately?
Look, you can't separate the two.
Yeah, right? I agree. Yeah.
We're talking about CVEs, or we're talking about ability from GitHub as a depender bot to give that visibility. SonarQube, another aspect from a security perspective, it plays an important aspect of what we do. So I personally can never say we have to separate the two. If you're not thinking about security on a daily basis, then you definitely have a massive gap in how you're thinking about production readiness or shipping out something.
Yeah. When you think about the kind of ongoing review of production readiness, we talked about kind of developers looking at the confidence score. We talked about teams consuming some of this information. Is there a different granularity of this information that people should be looking at? Like, why should a leader care about production readiness? Like, are they looking at actual production readiness and confidence scores? Are they looking at kind of second tier metrics like their DORA metrics, or should they care about production readiness and the way it's defined?
I think they should be caring about both. Right. I think one is actually contributing to the other. Yeah. Right? And that's again that indicator. It's a signal. Yeah. So if you're looking at DORA metrics as an example, and you're saying deployment frequency, if you've got a low deployment frequency, there's probably a high probability that your confidence score is going to be not as great as you would like, because it just means that the team is not in the position, either via their CI/CD pipelines, maybe the ways of working, all these other aspects is contributing to that indicator, giving you a signal that things you need to make some changes.
Yeah.
So I think the two works close together.
Yeah.
So you need to look at both of them.
Yeah. How do you think about what goes into a production readiness checklist in the first place? Because obviously you don't want to overload people with 100 requirements, but you still want some sort of baseline set that people should care about. How do you determine if something should be part of a standard checklist? How do you determine when to remove something? What does that process look like?
I mean, at the moment, we're looking at a subset of signals, especially on that confidence score. And those are the most important ones, And you can always look at it. I mean, the lessons that we've learned over years investing in this kind of space is, especially when we talk about standards, standards can really bloat. Yes. You start out with good intentions. You think, we just want to make sure that we're compliant. You really want to put that in front of a team to say, you have to think about these things. And then suddenly when you open your eyes, there's 30, 40 of these things that a team's got to look after. So we're consciously ensuring that we want to reduce the number. And I think an important aspect of looking at these kind of things is you need to be able to automate it. Yeah. If you can't automate it and you want to introduce it as part of, being ready to go to production, you're putting yourself in a very difficult position.
Yeah. Do you think about, and maybe this is a little bit more Cortex specific, but how do you think about the importance of, if at all, of levels to production readiness or the gamification of it? Is that something you guys have adopted, or do you think about it more as like just a baseline set of requirements that everyone has to follow?
I mean, if you think about when we're calculating a score, we think about its service. You can gamify it, right? There's always the opportunity to do that. But you can also look at it from we bring scorecards in the equation, which is such a great mechanism to create a visibility. And then the ability to do any initiative to really put it out there. If you bring those two together, I guess this is where the manager, the engineering manager or the team lead, the owner of services really comes into play. They can get a sense of how confident we are to go out to production. If it's low, we can use scorecard initiatives to drive the change. Yeah, but also can create a visibility for the team to feel, look, at the moment you're at a 40 out of 100. And the things that we see as, for instance, your quality aspects is very low. So you can use the scorecard to get that visibility. And then you can start investing in that space. You can either bring in some support to enable the team to, especially if you think about more legacy systems, what maybe we're already starting with a low code coverage in that space, to help the team to work around that, to start increasing the level of confidence.
The last question that I have, the listeners of this podcast are, engineering leaders, VPs, CTOs, and, similar folks. If you could give them one piece of advice, a lot of people aspire to have great production readiness programs and are maybe early on in their journey. If you give them one piece of advice on how to drive a successful production readiness program, if you're just starting off, what would you share?
Start small.
Yeah.
Right. Don't overload your team, and be very clear about what the expectation is. I think, as engineers, like I mentioned earlier about the customer expectation, the pace of things that needs to go out, the world is really moving very fast, is to be very selective how you want to approach this, and to see it as a journey, and not to come in very hard and cold and saying, I want you to go from 0 to 80 in a week's time. I think you're going to overload the team. It's going to have a very negative impact. When we talk about scorecards, that gamifying aspect, really use your tools to encourage your team to grow in that space, and just really investing in the team to be able to do that.
I love it. So just to summarize, have a customer mindset, start small.
Customer.
Automate as much as you can, shift as much of it left as you can.
Absolutely.
And that's a good place to start.
That's the one.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Really enjoyed it.
Love it. Thank you very much, Ganesh.